Hi everybody, I'm Lady Sylvine and welcome to my realm of purpose. Today I want to talk about the Inquisition Symbol, which might not be that interesting at first glance, but there's actually quite a bit of lore attached to it, which I thought was worth sharing because I kind of became obsessed with it instantly. It's one of those bits of lore that you just have to go after, so hence this video. The symbol for the Inquisition is a combination of two constellations in universe. Visus, the Watchful Eye, and Judix, the Sword of Mercy. You can find the constellations in Dragon Age Inquisition, with the Astrarium mini-puzzles across Southern Thedas. You know, the ones where you attach the stars and things. You can find Visus in the Frostback Basin during the Jaws of Hakon DLC, and Judix in the hinterlands of the main game. In lore, the original belief about this symbol, as a constellation, is that it's one of the eyes of the Lady of the Skies. That rhymes. An Alamari/Syrian goddess. Mainly it's associated with the Avar now because they're the only ones who really keep those beliefs and didn't move on to Andrastianism. Alamari and Syrian being the all-encompassing name for the natives of what is today Ferelden and Orlais, respectively. The Lady of the Skies is one of three main deities in the, for simplicity's sake, let's say, the Alamari religion. Alongside Korth the Mountain Father and Hakon Winter's Breath, which you'll be a bit more familiar with if you played Jaws of Hakon, because Hakon Winter's Breath is the quote-unquote main villain of that DLC. The Lady of the Sky's domain is that of the sky, as her name implies. She's the goddess of the wind, birds, and death. As the Avar dismember their dead and offer them to her children, the birds, to feast upon, believing that that's how they are carried off to a sort of afterlife in the skies, to meet with their fallen kin, as well as, one can assume, the goddess herself. So the Watchful Eye, or Visus, was originally her symbol. As the legends say, she opened one eye that was so bright that it led her people safely through the Frostback Mountains when they first crossed. This legend actually dates back to the ancient era, as stated by both Solus in-game, who is pretty reliable source on history, as well as in the World of Thedas Volume 1, in -2415 Ancient, which is over 3,000 years before the events of the games. The Alamari crossed the Frostbacks and settled in the lands that would eventually be known as Ferelden. According to Solus, the Alamari were fleeing a spirit called the Shadow Goddess, who still dwells somewhere in the southern tundra. For reference to this time period, because I know some people are interested and you would probably look it up anyway, this happened around 400 years after the Veil was created, presuming that that time aligns with the elves noticing their loss of immortality, which we know is tied to the creation of the Veil. Plus it's also around the time the old gods first pop up in lore and start speaking to the ancient magisters in dreams, which we know after veilguard is 100% tied to the elven gods and what Solus did in creating the Veil. So that kind of sets up that timeline of when the Veil went up, if we look at it evidence-wise. But back to the Alamari and crossing the Frostbacks. It was 1200 years before the Tevinter Imperium was founded, 2000 years before the first Blight was unleashed on Thedas by the ancient magisters, 2200 years before the birth of Andraste, and nearly 3,000 years before the founding of Ferelden. Yeah, Ferelden only became a kingdom 400 years before the events of the games, when we know for a fact the lore goes back 7,000 years. Fun fact actually, Inquisition takes place during the 400-year anniversary of Ferelden's founding, in 942 Dragon. Inquisition is just so heavily tied into the south, especially Ferelden, and I love that. So back to the constellation. The Watchful Eye is a symbol originating in Southern Thedas and its native beliefs. Also, the symbology and dichotomy between the bright eye of the Lady of the Skies, guiding the Alamari from a shadow goddess, is so interesting, especially when you consider how much it ties into Inquisition, once again. If we look at the song The Dawn Will Come, the lyrics say, "Shadows fall and hope is fled. Steel your heart, the dawn will come. The night is long and the path is dark. Look to the sky, for one day soon the dawn will come. The shepherd's lost and his home is far. Keep to the stars, the dawn will come. And that's sung to your Inquisitor, part of the Inquisition. So it's just, it ties that game and that protagonist so much to the mythos and the symbology of the South. Like, I feel like the Inquisitor is this embodiment of the South in a way. I feel like it carries a lot more weight if you play a female Inquisitor. Visus in Latin, and for reference, Latin is the language of Tevinter, it is Tevin, just like how Orlesian is French, basically. Visus means sight or seeing, and Judix means judge. With the rise of Andraste's rebellion, Visus was attributed to the Maker's light guiding her northward to victory. That connection being made because Andraste was Alamari. She would have believed in the Lady of the Skies and whatnot. The Maker comes into the story and those symbols suddenly change. After Andraste was executed by Tevinter, it's said that a new star appeared in the constellation to mark the sword that put her out of her misery on the pyre, the Sword of Mercy. And this created the burning sword eye symbol we're more familiar with. The lore is a bit weird in how it describes this combination of imagery, since, as I mentioned, the Sword of Mercy, or Judix, is a completely different set of stars. And yet the Codex for Visus states they were guided by the eye, and it became the Maker's gaze. The sword was added later. It is said that the star that marks the point of its blade only appeared in the night sky after Andraste's death. So I don't know what to tell you. Judix itself, as I said, is its own constellation, the Sword of Mercy. It depicts a downturned sword, assigned its stars long before Andraste's time. It originally referred to justice. In ancient Tevinter, a downturned sword meant a guilty verdict, which generally meant execution. The meaning changed over time as the sword became an Andrastean symbol, particularly with the rise of the Templars. The early Inquisition took these symbols as their heraldry, even before they joined the Andrastean faith, the imagery persisting over the centuries with its otherworldly deified meanings. The Inquisition itself predates the founding of the Orlesian Chantry, the Orlesian Chantry being founded in -3 Ancient. The First Inquisition having been founded in -100 Ancient. That's 70 years after the death of Andraste. Archon Hissarion, the ruler of the Tevinter Imperium, began Andrasteanism with the Imperial Chantry in -160 Ancient, 10 years after Andraste's death. All for reference because I know you guys would be interested, because I'm interested. If that sounds a little confusing and chaotic, that's because it is. Especially since the old gods were also still technically being worshipped at the time. The original goal of the Inquisition was to reclaim a bit of order and sanity in the world after the chaos of the First Blight, which still lingered because the First Blight lasted over 100 years. Andraste was born the same year that the First Blight ended. People can still remember the First Blight, as well as the fallout after Andraste's rebellion, and the shifting of beliefs in politics across Thedas. It was just a cesspit of chaos at that point. The world was kind of shattered politically because of Andraste. That in and of itself is a whole other story. In short, there were a lot of cults with varying beliefs, blood magic was running rampant, abominations and demons everywhere, and so the Inquisition was formed, existing outside politics and religion, with a singular goal of maintaining order in the world gone mad. These were people who just had enough and decided to do something about it. The Inquisition, as mentioned, wasn't strictly Andrastean, but kind of Andrastean adjacent, since they weren't part of anything officially, but they still kind of followed the Chant of Light. It's a little bit unclear, but that did eventually change. In 105 Divine, the Second Blight began, and the Inquisition fell apart as the last Inquisitor of old, Ameridan, who we do meet in the Jaws of Hakon DLC by the way, disappeared somewhere in the Frostbacks, hunting an Avar dragon god. This blight would last until 195 Divine. In 120 Divine, around 220 years after the first founding of the Inquisition, the Navaran Accord is signed between them in the Orlesian Chantry of the south. And long story short, this made the Inquisition an official part of the Chantry, and it dissolved as a result into two main groups: the Seekers of Truth, which are the Chantry's secret police basically, and the Templar Order, made to guard mages as the Circle of Magi was formed. The Sword Eye Judex Visus symbol of the Inquisition was split up as well. The Seekers of Truth took the Watchful Eye, and the Templars took the Sword of Mercy. Which leads us into the events of Inquisition, and the rising of these united symbols once more. 820 years after the signing of the Navarin Accord, in 940 Dragon, Lord Seeker Lambert, the commander of the Seekers of Truth, annuls the Navarin Accord, severing the ties between the Seekers of Truth and the Orlesian Chantry, as the College of Enchanters voted to dissolve the Circle of Magi, and split from Chantry rule. This resulted in the Templar Order also separating from the Chantry officially, since their duty was then made redundant as there were no mages for them to officially guard with the Chantry. Although there were still those on all sides loyal to the Orlesian Chantry, there were those who insisted that this meant war. And a war there was. In 941 Dragon, after a year of fighting, Divine Justinia calls for a divine conclave between the mages and Templars at the Temple of Sacred Ashes in the Frostback Mountains. The very same Frostback Mountains that this belief system surrounding the Inquisition symbology originates. Divine Justinia secretly endorsed the reforming of the Inquisition, to sort everyone out basically as a neutral outside force, since the division from the Chantry is what was intended by breaking the Navarin Accord, because clearly the Orlesian Chantry was not working within the best interests of the Seekers of Truth, of the Templars, of the mages, so they want away from that. And so the Burning Eye and Sword is made whole once more, with a reformed Inquisition. Then Fen'Harel, Corypheus, and the Herald of Andraste, soon to be the Inquisitor, enter the scene to mess with things further. And the rest is history. Obviously the Divine Conclave and the reforming of the Inquisition happening in the Frostbacks, where this Watchful Eye symbol originates, is just quite poetic in lore when you know that. I just think it's so cool. Especially if you look into it, and it's there for you to read, and it's something I only recently realised, and I had to share it. This is where I want to go into the importance of the Inquisitor in Dragon Age Inquisition, since it ties so heavily into the lore of Thedas, as all the games do, but there's something really special to me about Inquisition and the Inquisitor as a protagonist. The Inquisition, through its Sword Eye symbology, is almost as old as Thedas itself, with the exception of whatever the hell spirits, elves, and dwarves were up to before human history was recognised. Who knows? Visus is the symbol of Southern Thedas, essentially, and by extension the Inquisitor is the symbol of Southern Thedas. You could argue more so than the Warden, and I guess Hawk. Inquisitor was such an important character for the lore, and I think that's part of why my Inky is my favourite protagonist, along with being my first protagonist. In concept art, not only was this Watchful Eye the symbol of the Inquisition, but the Inquisitor had a crown with the Watchful Eye on it, tying them to the roots of Southern Thedas, and with the Judex, the Sword of Mercy, it ties them to the north as well. The Inquisitor is the embodiment of the ideas of guidance, protection, fire, mercy, escaping shadow, night, darkness, moving towards light, dawn, truth, freedom, an arbiter of justice and judgment. Not only that, but the Inquisitor is tied to deities of several religions: Alamari, Andrastianism, the Old Gods, the Elven Gods. They are this chosen one, not just of their time, but across the lore of Thedas, and that is so cool for a protagonist. The Inquisitor is effectively the embodiment of Thedas itself, a living legend, this demigod of lore. I really love my Inquisitor. I love Inquisition. I love the lore of these games. And that's about all I have for today, guys. I hope you found it interesting and it made you go, oh, my Inquisitor is even cooler? Because my Inquisitor got cooler researching this. I'd love to know what you guys think. Last thing on the topic of constellations for this video, because I know some of you might be curious about the symbology of other games, Veilguard's V symbol does kind of resemble one of the constellations, Draconis, or the High Dragon. But not perfectly, unfortunately, as you can see. But I do like that the codex for this mentions that Tevinter reserves High Dragon symbology for the old gods, and all of them are accounted for in constellations, leaving it up in the air about what's happening with this particular constellation. Speculations going from a depiction of some sort of sea creature to an unknown eightfold god, stricken from historical record. Obviously after Veilguard, it's very, very unlikely that there was an eightfold god, but I still think it's cool. I will say this though, after playing Veilguard, Draconis looks kind of like a spirit, if I'm being honest. Perhaps that's what it is supposed to be. So Veilguard's symbol is that of a spirit, whereas Inquisition's is that of ancient ties to gods. So they're both kind of unique in that aspect. If you want to go even more basic, Rook symbolises a head scratch and impossibility, while Inquisitor symbolises order and guidance. It's pretty fitting, and I just like it. A final question for you all to ponder. Did you enjoy the Astrarian puzzles in Inquisition, or were they just frustrating and tedious? Because I thought they were pretty relaxing, and I just wonder if that's just me. Thank you all so much for watching, and a particular thank you to the Spirit Wolves, my lovely channel members. I hope you have a great day and a good Pride Month!